How did you go about finding that avenue in a company the size of Google?
I had to be very proactive. My first job at Google when I was fresh out of the university was actually in event management.
If you could go back and talk to the 18-year-old you, knowing everything that you know now, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
The biggest mistake I made with that startup was that.
Welcome back to another episode of the Beyond the Wealth podcast. I'm your host, Andres Sanchez, and today I have Anne-Laure Le Cunff, the founder of Ness Labs, a newsletter read by over 100,000 readers. She wrote a book called Tiny Experiments, which we're going to dive in and learn all about. She previously worked at Google. Her work's been featured in Rolling Stones, Forbes, the Financial Times, and many others. She has over 65,000 followers on X, and I am extremely excited to learn more about her, and I cannot wait for her to share all of this valuable knowledge with our community and audience. And Laurie, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
I want to just go right in and understand, when did you start to get this interest in science and this amazing industry that you kind of followed through? Was that something that happened very early on? Was it always something interesting to you? And we can kind of take it from there.
I think I've always been fascinated with how the brain works. And even before I knew about neuroscience, how the mind works, why we think the way we think and connect the way we connect with others, how we see the world, how we navigate it. But coming from an immigrant background, my parents and specifically my mom really pushed me to explore a career that would be safe, that would make me money basically, so she could relax and know that everything would be fine for me. So instead of going into science, I went into business, and I started working at Google. I worked on a couple of startups, and it's only later on in my late 20s that I decided to go back to university and study neuroscience.
So Google, your time at Google was just business related. I know that you did do some projects in the health space, so it wasn't your typical Google technology employee, which was cool. How did you go about finding that avenue in a company the size of Google?
I had to be very proactive. My first job at Google when I was fresh out of university was actually in event management. And I loved it. I had so much fun. And I think it really helped me learn how to manage big projects with a lot of stakeholders and big budgets. But ultimately, that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. Although when I was offered this job, they said event management. I said, yes, that could be anything. I want to work at Google. You can offer me any kind of role. I'll say yes. It was my getting my foot in the door.
Yep.
Once I was inside the company, it was a lot easier to search for opportunities that were more aligned with my interests. And I did it kind of the same way you do it when you're trying to connect with someone and collaborate with them. I sent a lot of cold emails inside of the company to different managers saying, hey, I saw that you launched this product, that you're working on this project, and I would love to be a little part of it. And at first, because I was so junior, I took advantage of something called the 20% project at Google, where you can say, I'm going to spend 20% of my time on something that is not directly related to my role. And something not many people know is that Gmail actually came out of a 20% project. Someone just said, I want to work on this email thing. And that's Gmail now. So I did a couple of 20% projects with people who were based in the US, even though I was based in the UK at the time. And one thing leading to another, trying to be as helpful as possible, I was ultimately offered a role and I moved to San Francisco on the digital health team.
That's very cool. And I have heard of the 20% project. It's very cool to hear that it is actually something that is used and somebody like yourself that actually got to use it. I heard the rumor of Gmail being launched from that. Thank you for validating that for me. And I love that you mentioned that once you got into this company, you started to be able to move around. I talk about that a lot. I work right now. I still haven't been able to go full on the podcast and my entrepreneurial journey. I work at one of these massive tech companies like Google. And I always tell people, it's if you want to go and make good money, it's very lucrative. don't get so hung up on what job you get in the door with, because there's always a appetite for moving around, and the company typically supports that. So I love that you were able to experience that and it helped you kind of get to where you wanted to go. Let's talk about you starting to transition out of Google. That's definitely a big moment in your life. Everybody is always nervous when they take that full stab at entrepreneurship. I'd love to get in your brain and understand what that time in your career was like.
Yes, I had an amazing time at Google. I worked with really smart people on interesting projects. Again, I had pretty big budgets, especially that early on in my career. So it really, I was so happy about my first years there, but I started to feel limited after a while. Not necessarily limited in terms of the kind of projects that I could be working on, but just in terms of the path. It felt like a very linear path in the sense that Google had codified how to be successful inside of the company. So you could literally check a rubric with a checklist in it of the things that you had to achieve at specific points, the skills that you had to demonstrate in order to move on to the next level in your career journey. And you could know with a fairly high level of certainty that if you played the game exactly in the way that was described on those internal documents, and if you were working on the right projects at the right time with the right people, then in a few years, you would probably be offered a director position. And so that was a definition of success, which can be a path that a lot of people might want to follow for different reasons. And maybe they have personal reasons, or maybe they have other kinds of side projects that don't necessarily make money. And in that sense, staying at a company like Google and following that path can make a lot of sense. In my case, I felt like I wanted more. I felt like it was a little bit too soon in my career to have this sense of certainty as to where I was going. And I started feeling a little bit like my path had become too predictable. So that was one side of the coin. And then the other side of the coin is it was that being in Silicon Valley and seeing all of those startup founders around me, I also felt inspired by that. And I wanted to also become a startup founder. So I told my manager that I was going to leave in a month. We did the transition together, and I left and I started my own startup at the time, which didn't work out. So that was only one step in my cycle of growth rather than the final milestone that I thought it would be at the time.
And I think it's good, even though it was a, say, quote unquote, not a success. I would love to learn about what that was, because I always think I, one of the things that I don't love about podcasts is sometimes it's always about the positives and the wins, but people want to hear about the struggles and the times where things didn't work out, because unfortunately, 99% of people end up in that spot. And if we can go in and maybe highlight a few things that you were able to do to overcome that and move on to now the successful parts of your career, that might help one or two people listening or watching right now.
Absolutely. I think the biggest mistake I made with that startup was that I tried to apply a playbook that I was copy pasting from other successful founders. This is still the case to this day that you have a lot of online resources telling you how to be successful with case studies and frameworks. At the time, I was a really big fan of the Y Combinator's community resources, and they're absolutely amazing. But the mistake I made at the time was to think that I could just copy paste those playbooks and then I would be successful. So, for example, I got a co founder for no other reason than reading somewhere in one of these resources that you need a co founder in order to be successful. You will not be successful without a co founder. And I thought it was true. I didn't question it. So I got a co founder and paired up with someone I didn't know very well. And it turned out that we were not a good match. And he was a great person, has nothing to do with him. It was more about the compatibility in terms of values, in terms of vision and mission. And I think I can never remember the number, but I think it's something like 98% of startups that fail because of founders incompatibility. And that was our case. We just didn't want the same things, didn't have the same working styles, and we ended up breaking up. I'm sorry, but I just heard there's a police car just outside. Can you hear it?
Yeah, yeah, no problem, no problem.
Yeah. I will end up being set up in another room that's quiet, but right now we're in my living room. So it's a bit noisy sometimes.
All
Um,
good.
okay, cool. So I'm trying to remember what I was saying.
The incompatibility
Oh, yeah.
with the
Yeah, yeah.
co-founder.
Um, cool. And today, the way I'm doing things, the way things have changed, the main change in mindset that I've had is that I'm a lot more experimental. So instead of reading something and saying I'm going to copy paste those steps, I'm learning from what other people have done. I'm testing it, just seeing if that could work for me and my business. And then I decide whether I want to implement it long term or not. And that has led to a lot more growth, a lot more learning, and even self discovery, because sometimes something might work in terms of external metrics of success. You might see that you're actually making more money with a specific approach, but maybe you find it very tedious and you hate doing it. And in that case, that's also part of the experiment, deciding, cool, I can see why this is working. I can see why it worked for this other founder, but I'm making the conscious decision to not implement this in my business because I just hate doing the thing. And that's not, I don't want to design a business where I'm waking up every morning and dreading working on it.
Yeah, and I love that you highlight that because I think more than ever, young founders are just drowned in this sea of information. You can literally look anywhere, and there's this 18-year-old making $1 million a month doing this. There's this 25-year-old that built this business and they're crushing it. There's somebody that's left their corporate job and in 2 months now has a multi-million-dollar business. And it's amazing that we get to see and understand all of those different case studies and all of those different experiences, but most of the time that's just not the way that it ends up working. And so many people get stuck on this analysis of like reading, learning, but there's a little bit of a lack of doing. And I love your theory on it where it's like you're not going in and thinking this is how it has to be done just because somebody else did. Let me try it, understand why it worked for somebody else, and then be able to create my own version of that. And I think that's really important for founders to understand because there's a million paths to success and yours is not going to be the same as mine, and somebody else is not going to be the same as ours. And it's important for people to understand that you've got to kind of blaze your own trail, take what you can. And I always say this, like, in a world like this where I connect with hundreds of people and I'm constantly meeting and talking, my goal is to never change me, but I want to take a little piece of every conversation and find maybe one nugget that I loved and be like, okay, well, I can implement that into my day to day, or I can think a little bit differently because I learned this, but never change the things that are me. And I think it's really cool that you were able to do that. You go from now this, I don't want to call failed startup, but not a successful startup, to where you are now. I'd love to learn how you landed on launching Ness Labs. And then I have a newsletter. Yours is read by 100,000 people. Mine's not there yet. So I have tons of questions to kind of pick your brain on that.
Yes, I love talking about newsletters. I went back to university after my startup failed because I was completely lost. For the first time in my life, I had no idea what to do next. As I said at Google, it was pretty clear. I had a checklist of things to do. When I worked on my startup, I thought it was pretty clear. I thought you could just apply those playbooks and you would be successful. Turned out that was not the case. And so all of a sudden, in my late 20s, I realized that there's no playbook and I had to just figure out for myself what I wanted to do. So I went back to this curiosity that I had always had, which was the brain, the mind, what makes us human. And I decided to go back to university to study neuroscience, not to achieve a specific goal, not to be successful, but just because I was curious about these topics. And I knew that whatever came out of it, I would be excited to wake up in the morning and ask these questions and study these. So I learned about something in that process that was called the generation effect. This is a psychological phenomenon that shows that by simply creating your own version of something you're studying, you're going to both understand it and remember it better. I thought it was pretty neat. So I decided every week to write about something I was studying in school. And to stay accountable, I decided to create a newsletter. And I said, every Thursday, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to pick something interesting I learned about the mind, about the brain from psychology and neuroscience, and I'm going to turn it into a short newsletter that I'm going to send to other people like me who are curious about how this could be applied to work better, to think better, to create better. So that was the beginning of the Ness Labs newsletter.
I love that because I find that newsletters, the hardest part is actually having the content to write about. And you're able to use something that wasn't a huge lift. It's something you were already entrenched in, already learning, and then go and share it with the world. And I had never heard of that theory that you just mentioned. And I find it very interesting to kind of take something and, like what I was just saying, make it your own, take a little piece of it and just kind of think of it your own way. You start sending it to like-minded people, talk about how it starts to grow, and you start to build this massive community around it, because that was what really caught my attention.
And you're really pointing to something that is really important is that I think a lot of people don't start creating online, whether it's writing or creating a podcast or a YouTube channel or really any kind of creation, online creation, because they think that they need to wait until they're the expert
Yep.
before they can get started. And what I did, what you're doing right now, and what a lot of successful people have done is learn in public. Instead of waiting until you're the expert to start sharing what you've learned, just share what you've just learned because you're already one step ahead. If you share something you learned this morning, it might be helpful to someone who's never heard about it before. And so you can already be helpful to other people way before you feel like you have this level of expertise. And I would even take it one step further and say, maybe never consider that you're the expert. Just stay a perpetual student for the rest of your life. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to highlight that, because my whole reason for starting this podcast was I wanted to meet new people. I loved business. I still hadn't found my big success. I had founded a few companies in college, ended up saying, you know what, I'm going to go the corporate route and make some money. And I was like, how do I connect and meet more amazing people? I'm not a business guru or a business founder, but if I just lead with curiosity and ask people, hey, can you give me 30 to 45 minutes of your time? And I'll do all the work I can to show your story to as many people as possible. I was so surprised at how many yeses and how little no's I started to get. And if I would have sat there and said, you know what, I shouldn't do this till I launch a business, I shouldn't do this till I have my big success, I would have missed out on all of these connections, all of these conversations. And that to me is would have been a huge regret. It would have been something, because I'm never going to be an expert. I'm never going to sit on here and talk to anybody who I know more than them, because we're all in different fields. We're all in different situations. So I said, you know what? I just want to come on here, press record, and lead with curiosity and meet amazing people. And I'm so happy I did that, because I would be lying if I didn't have those thoughts early on. I'm like, well, is anybody actually going to care what I talk about? Who's going to actually want to talk to me? Like, what do I have to offer them? And as I started to just record and meet new people, it quickly became like, hey, this is my show. Like, I'm building this around people. People can understand that I'm very curious about what they're building, and they're happy to be here too. And I'm so happy that I took that leap of faith. And I encourage anybody listening and watching now to follow that journey or follow that thought process of, you don't need to be an expert to launch anything. If you're genuinely curious or passionate about anything and want to start putting content out into the world, you really should, because you are going to be pleasantly surprised by how well received it's most likely going to be. And that's going to be what continues to help you move forward.
Yeah, I think as you said, this is really all about leading with curiosity. And you can do that at several stages of your journey. First, to decide what are the topics that you might want to explore. And second, as a way to connect with other people, telling them in a very honest way, as you said, hey, this is something I'm curious about. I don't know much about it yet, but this is actually why I want to talk to you. Let's discuss this. I want to learn from you. Let's have this conversation. And then let's share this conversation with other people who might be curious about the same topic. So, by simply injecting a little bit of curiosity at each step of the journey, you can make progress. You can become successful, even if you don't have a clear end goal, even if you don't have that matrix, that checklist to follow.
Yeah, and I think that's even that what you mentioned there about not having a clear end goal, because so many people don't start things because they're like, well, what is it going to lead to? What does the end look like? And I don't know why you would be thinking about the end before you've even started. You going and starting and posting is where you will start to formulate what your end goal is. Because for everybody, it's different. Some people want to build companies to exit, some people want to build companies to have something that they own for their whole life to pass down to other generations. And I think it's very important to not be wrapped up in what the end's going to look like and be very focused on like what you can do every day to get a little bit better. And you will start to see that the end goal will become more and more clear as you're actually going through the motions, posting, learning, building whatever is curious and interesting to you. So I love all of those answers. I want to understand because right now I feel more than ever community based businesses are so popular and so important. Everybody wants to feel a sense of community. Everybody wants to be around like minded people. I think you've done an amazing job with that with Ness Labs. Obviously, 100,000 people would say the same. And I want to understand what are some of the ways that you grew that newsletter? And also, what are some of the ways that you fostered a community that obviously has been interested in sticking around with you along your journey?
I did, and I still do to this day, a lot of things that don't scale at all. I reply to every single email that I get. And a lot of my friends who are founders and who also run pretty big communities tell me that this is completely crazy and that at this stage, a VA should be doing this. And I do have an amazing assistant and she helps with a bunch of logistical stuff. But any personal email that I get, people who reply to the newsletter, it might sometimes take me 2 weeks to come back to them because I have other things to do, but I will reply to everyone. So I think generally caring about the members of the community instead of seeing it as a broadcasting relationship where I write something, I hit send, and then I don't care about the feedback that I get. Having this really the sense of a two-way conversation has been incredibly important in nurturing this community at Ness Labs. And then we actually have two parts in the community. The first one is just the free newsletter, and then we have a paid private membership for people who want to go a little bit deeper, where we have online courses, we have workshops, we have co-working sessions. And even for this, for example, instead of just announcing it and say, hey, we have this private community now, you can join it, I actually went into my email dashboard and I looked at the most engaged people there, the people who were regularly reading the newsletter. And I sent an individual email to all of them at the time saying, hey, I've noticed that you've opened those newsletters, that you're interested in these topics. I'm going to be trying this community thing. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it open long term. Right now, I just want to test it. Again, this experimental approach. But if you'd be willing to join, I'd love to have your feedback. And so the first 300 people who joined the private community, I reached out to one like that. Again, very unscalable. But I think this is why 4 years later, the community is still going and is still so vibrant to this day.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that there has been a little bit of a lack of personal touch as we get all of these automation tools. Hiring and scaling overseas talent is easier and easier. There's a little bit of a loss of that like personal touch which you're mentioning, and I think you're 100% right on. If I got an email, because I'm signed up to tons of newsletters, I love reading what other people are doing. If I got a personal email from that founder asking me to join the community, and you can genuinely tell it's you and not something written by a VA that's copy and pasted and sent to 100 plus people, I would be so much more motivated to join and learn and understand. And I love that you're just going against the grain. It doesn't matter that it's not scalable. If it makes you happy and it's something you genuinely enjoy about the community you built, you go and do it. Where most people would be like, oh, well, you should hire somebody to do it. You shouldn't do, but it's your business. It's something you've built. It's something you're passionate about. And I know that your readers and audience listening to this conversation, hopefully when it comes out and is released, will be happy to hear how much you genuinely care about them and what you're building. And the passion and excitement that you have for it is very obvious just talking to you and learning. So it's very I don't know what a good word to say is. It's very motivating for me as I am trying to foster my community and eventually down the road launch a paid community where people can collaborate and learn and all of this really awesome stuff. So for me, it's very exciting seeing someone like yourself who has done it. And I'm taking mental notes on different things like, and it's funny you say that because I was literally just looking at my dashboard and I think we have 12,000 subscribers now, and I think I have just under 100 who are like really engaged, open almost every newsletter, click all the links, and I'm already starting to think of how can I go and serve those people immediately while I work and do things on the back end to provide them value. A conversation like this makes it very easy for me to now put a little task for this week to go and learn how I can work and help and do something with those people. So thank you for motivating me. And I'm sure there's hundreds of people watching and listening that feel the same way. Um,
Thank you. I love that. And I think it's really all about what are you optimizing for in your business? And there's no good or unique, perfect answer to this. The answer to this is going to be different for every single founder. And in my case, I'm optimizing for connection. And so that, because I know that's what makes me feel excited, that's what makes me feel alive, that's what makes me want to wake up in the morning. So I'm not going to automate away those opportunities for human connection. That's what I'm optimizing for. You could be optimizing for education at scale, for example. I think this is also an amazing aim to have for your business. And so maybe in that case, actually, you cannot have those one-to-one connections with everyone. You might be thinking about, okay, how do I create a course that is self-paced and as many people as possible can take? And you can be also optimizing with working as little as possible, which I have friends, founders, that's what they're optimizing for. And so for them, those automations make a lot of sense because what they want to do is maybe to sit down in front of their computers for 6 to 7 hours every week maximum, check that the automations are working, making a few tweaks here and there, and then go back to surfing, hiking, doing whatever it is that are other things that are not in the business that give them joy. So that's a question I would recommend any founder to ask themselves. What is it I'm optimizing for?
I love it. I want to talk and learn about the book you wrote, Tiny Experiments. I did some brief research just trying to understand where you were coming from with the book and the angles, but I want everybody here to understand as well because I thought it was extremely interesting. Please give us a quick elevator pitch on the book and what it's about.
Well, I mean, this is actually a great segue because this is really a book about figuring out what you're optimizing for. Instead of trying to optimize for a definition of success that you've been maybe following for a while based on what your peers, parents, colleagues, or society in general are expecting from you, this book is about experimenting your way to a version of success that is truly yours. And it's inspired by the scientific method because I'm a neuroscientist. I run Ness Labs as we've been discussing, but I also finished my PhD in neuroscience. I work at the ADHD Research Lab at King's College London. And through my scientific studies, I've discovered how you can build cycles of experimentation, where instead of having this fixed version of success you're trying to get to, success is learning something new. So you start with a question, with a hypothesis, you design a tiny experiment, you collect data, you analyze it, and based on the results, you decide what you want to do next. And in that way, you design growth loops instead of trying to climb a ladder that looks like the exact same ladder as your neighbors. And instead of looking at a giant leaderboard where everyone is comparing each other and looking at their success, you're only looking at your own success. So that's what Tiny Experiments is all about.
That's amazing. And I'd love to even dive deeper into what you just mentioned there of creating these success loops. How does anybody listening that just heard that and was like, wow, that was really interesting? How can I go and implement that into my week, like this week? If somebody listened to our episode right now and wanted to go ahead and obviously go and buy Tiny Experiments and learn more, but if they wanted to go ahead and kind of start taking a stab at that right now, what advice would you give them?
So any experiment starts with observation. And I know for people listening to this kind of podcast, they're probably the kind of people who also like to get things done. And they might be very excited to just start implementing an experiment straight away. But you really need to take a step back and just observe the current data in the environment so you can see afterwards what you're changing and the impact that your experiment has. So I would highly recommend taking a couple of hours at some point this week and just observing your current life and work. That can be as simple as opening your Google Calendar and just having a look at it. How do you spend your time? What are the meetings that give you energy? What are the meetings that drain your energy? What are the projects you're excited about? What are ideas you've been curious about, but maybe you didn't have time? There's nothing in your calendar about them, even though you keep on thinking about them, right? Take notes. Can do that in the notebook, in your note taking app, but really, just like a scientist taking notes, just write these down. I love this. I hate this. I want more of this. I want less of this. Based on those notes, you can already start thinking about a tiny experiment that you can run. What is something you're going to try for the next week? Something you're going to tweak. Same, while you run your experiment, take notes. And at the end of the experiment, you can decide whether you're going to just keep going if you're happy with it. If you feel like it's helping, but it's not perfect yet, maybe do a little tweak. And if that looked great on paper, but you actually hated doing this in the past week, just stop. That's fine. Now you know that thing is not for you. And that's what I mean by growth loops is that if you do that every week, and you can have experiments that are a little bit longer also, but if you have those cycles where you observe the current situation, you try something new, and then you look at the impact and decide what you want to do next, you're going to grow. There's nowhere you're just going to grow, even though you're not quite sure what the long term plan is. Week after week, there are going to be compound effects of that type of experimentation, and you're going to grow.
I love that you mentioned to do it week by week. I think people get wrapped up in this like huge thought that you need to implement new habits and new things, and it needs to be something that you do for long periods of time. If not, it won't be successful. And that's obviously true for some things. But thinking about life in shorter terms like that and saying, hey, this week I want to add this little habit and see if it makes my day to day better. And allowing those things to compound. I've never thought about it that way, and I'm learning this right now as we talk. And I can't, like you mentioned, I can't see a way that you don't grow and you don't become better by implementing these things into your weeks. And I am now thinking already, and sometimes I'm thinking of a million things as I'm having a conversation. I'm already thinking of what I can start to implement this week to try and get better. So I'm going to give myself a to do of trying a tiny experiment this week. It's Monday. We get the chance to start the week today with this amazing conversation. And anybody listening and watching, I encourage you to try and take a stab at a tiny experiment. And if it works or if it doesn't work, share it with us. Let us know what it was. Let us know what you learned about yourself, that maybe you now have this awesome new fun part of your week that you were neglecting because you didn't just write down what you thought you liked and you didn't like. So I love it. And I would like to understand a little bit more on like, how did you balance all of this? You're working in your studies and research around ADHD. You run Ness Labs and you put a very personal touch to it. You wrote this book and are now launching this book, releasing this book out. how do you balance all of this on your schedule and do such an amazing job to make time for podcasts like this as well?
It's really all about not sticking to, sorry. I don't know if you can hear these. Can you? It's
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's very
That one,
noisy.
yeah.
Sorry. um, it's really all about not sticking to a rigid schedule. That's the only reason why I've managed to balance all of these projects. So I always make sure to have time and space for reflection, usually at the beginning of the week. For me, some people like to do this on Sunday. I used to do it on Sunday evenings, but now I tend to do it on Monday mornings. And again, I look at my calendar and I ask myself, okay, what are my priorities this week? Do the things in my calendar align with those priorities? If not, should I move things around? And I try to make sure that the way I spend my time is aligned with what I want to work on. But that's the very important part, is that that can change every week. So instead of having this time blocking where I say every Monday morning this is what I do, every Wednesday this is what I do, I really take it week after week. That means that some weeks I might spend most of my time working on academic research and I have very little time for Ness Labs or for doing podcasts such as these. Other weeks it's the opposite. I'll have tons of podcast conversations and it will be amazing, but I will have very little time to write and do research. And that's okay, because I know that every week I adapt my schedule based on my priorities, based on my energy levels, based on different constraints. I don't beat myself up if at the end of a week I haven't touched a specific project. You can think very long term and not worry about your productivity on a day to day basis when you keep on experimenting with your schedule in this way and when you don't cling onto a linear approach.
There's so much that I'm learning from this conversation that I'm thinking as you're just talking about me and the way that I do things that I'm like, maybe I could do a little bit better on, like, I'm the type of person that's like, all right, I need to do this. This has to get done. This has to get done. But sometimes, and even in just this conversation, thinking about just taking a step back and being like, does this really need to get done? Like, is this actually going to derail anything if it's not done tomorrow by 12 p.m.? Most likely not. So why not be more flexible? And I think that's something that I can improve on. And even in talking and mentoring and meeting with tons of people, I think it's something a lot of people can improve on. When we get into this nonstop kind of go, 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 go mentality when you're working, it is so hard to take a step back and be like, do I actually need to be doing all this? Like, is it actually moving the needle, or am I just working to work to feel busy? And I know that a lot of people fall into that trap of there's tons of stuff to do, and you kind of start to forget about doing stuff that actually matters to you and that you actually care about. And I've had experiences like that where I've worked, and then I take time off, and then you come back and you feel refreshed and your work is significantly better. Thinking about the way that you're mentioning, to not be so tied down to your schedule, not be so obsessed with needing to get things done. I can see so many different ways that that would improve probably the overall work for me. And I have to imagine this has taken you years to kind of understand and learn and balance. When in your life did you start to kind of actually implement these tiny experiments before you thought it was this actual concept that you could write a book and share with the world?
Yeah, it's funny because I consider myself a recovering productivity junkie, and I can see from the Ness Labs analytics from SEO what keywords people type to find Ness Labs. How do they end up on our website? And a lot of them type things like how to be more productive, how to better manage my time. And it's very interesting because the Ness Labs audience is exactly me just a few years ago, where, and even now I still struggle with these things sometimes. So I'm also writing to keep on helping myself and help other people in the process. But I want to tell them, and I want to tell myself, I keep repeating myself, you don't need to be more productive. The kind of person who looks up this kind of content online to be more productive is usually already very, very productive. And it's just that they don't realize it, and they feel like they're not doing enough. They feel like it's never enough, and they need to make sure that every single minute in their calendar is accounted for and used in a way that contributes to their projects, to their professional growth, to their intellectual growth, right? The idea of just doing nothing or wasting time or not being efficient is something that doesn't feel comfortable and that they want to fix. So for me, the moment I started being a bit more experimental was when I had that realization that I didn't need to be as efficient as possible. I'm not a robot. That's not what I should aim for. Again, this idea of what do you optimize for? I should optimize for doing work that feels alive, that feels connected to the things I'm interested in, that gives me opportunities to learn from other people and to grow. That's what I should be optimizing for. Not being as productive as possible, as efficient as possible, and managing my time minute by minute in my schedule, making sure that each minute is accounted for. And my first experiment, proper experiment, was actually the Ness Labs newsletter. I said, okay, I'm going to run this experiment. I'm going to write this newsletter every week. And I'm not going to try to have any outcome here. If that doesn't work out, that is not failure. I will have learned something new about what I enjoy, whether I like writing online or not, because I had never done it for a long period of time, and whether I like teaching about neuroscience. My only aims here were learning. And so that's the mental shift. That's one of the big mental shifts that you want to have here, is really shifting from this efficiency mindset of I need to be as productive as possible to this experimental mindset of I just need to learn something new. If I learn something new, that is success.
Well, I think that first initial experiment worked out pretty well. So I love that you started it and look at what it's turned into now down the road. As we come here to the end of our conversation, I always like to ask founders a question that seems very simple, but it typically gets people to have to think a little bit deep. And for you, it's if you could go back and talk to the 18-year-old you, knowing everything that you know now, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
You can ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. This is something that took me a very long time to learn. And I think I could have avoided a lot of suffering if I had been more comfortable raising my hand and saying, this is hard. I'm struggling here. And maybe I could do with a little bit of help. And to this day, this is still something where sometimes I feel like I have to do it on my own. I can figure it out. I have to be strong. And I have to remind myself that people are very happy to help if you ask, if you raise your hand. So, yeah, that's the advice I would give the younger Anne-Laure. I would tell her it's okay to ask for help.
I love that. And I think that is valuable for anybody. I think that any founder, anybody that's passionate or a high caliber individual thinks that they need to do everything on their own and they need to figure it out. And it's hard for a reason. Asking for help has to be one of the most underrated things that anybody can do on a day-to-day basis to make life easier, to get better in many ways. So I love that. And that's actually not one person has mentioned that in the 60 plus times I've asked that question. You're the first one that's asked that. And I think it is a fantastic answer. Um, I want to make sure, I want to make sure people that are still here with us watching and interested can go and connect with you. Obviously, we've talked about Ness Labs, and that'll be linked below because I want anybody interested to go and find it. Where can people follow you on social media, connect with you, and potentially reach out if they're interested?
Yes, absolutely. I am active on several social media platforms, including X and LinkedIn, Blue Sky. My handle is the same everywhere. It's Neuran, Neuranne. And if people want to order a copy of the book, they can go to tinyexperiments.org.
Amazing. And Laura, thank you so much for having this conversation. All of that will be linked below, even the tiny experiments. I'm going to go and check out that book as well, because I think my life could use some tiny experiments right now. And I'm sure many people listening and watching could agree with that. So I wanted to say again, thank you for coming on the show. It has been an absolute pleasure. And thank you, everybody that's been here with us, listening, watching. That is the end of the episode, and we will see you on the next one.